My sister used her son to frame me for our $1 billion inheritance. My sister didn't just betray me. She weaponized her own child to destroy my life for money. She used her son to frame me, convinced my entire family I was a monster, and made sure I was cut off from our $1 billion inheritance. They disowned me, erased me from the family, and handed her all the power. What she didn't know was that I still controlled the will. My sister, Eliza, stood in the center of the grand hall of our family's estate, a triumphant, almost predatory smirk etched on her face. The crystal chandeliers, each one a relic from a Venetian palace our father had admired, cast 1,000 glittering reflections in her champagne flute. She had just used her own son, my nephew Leo, to frame me and orchestrate the theft of our family's billion-dollar fortune. As she raised that glass to toast her so-called victory, surrounded by a new circle of fawning, sycophantic friends, she had absolutely no idea that I secretly held the one key, a small, intricate detail buried in my father's will, that was poised to bring her entire glittering, hollow world crashing down around her. She looked at me across the room, a dismissive, pitying glance, and I let her. She thought she had won. In her mind, the game was over, but she hadn't won. She had only started a clock that was about to run out, tick by agonizing tick. Before we get into the heart of this story, do me a favor and drop a comment to let me know where you're watching from in the world. And please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because you are not going to want to miss a single detail of how this incredible betrayal unfolds. There were always two distinct, non-intersecting orbits in our family: the vast, intricate universe my father built, and the glittering, shallow galaxy my sister lived in. My name is Alex, and I've always been the quiet one. While my sister Eliza was off spending a sum that could fund a small startup on a single week at Paris Fashion Week or chartering yachts in Monaco with people whose names she'd forget by Monday, I was at my father's side. I wasn't just his son, I was his apprentice, his shadow. From the moment I was old enough to understand a balance sheet, he was teaching me the business. A global logistics empire he had miraculously built from the engine of a single rusty second-hand truck. He'd always put a hand on my shoulder, his gaze fixed on the bustling port outside his office window, and say, "Alex, this isn't about money. Never let it be about the money. It's about legacy. It's about building something that lasts, something with integrity." Eliza never understood that sentiment. Not for a single second. To her, the company was just a giant, inexhaustible ATM, and she was pacing impatiently, waiting for the universe to finally hand her the pin. She resented the time I spent with our father, mistaking my genuine dedication for some pathetic, desperate need for his approval. She was incapable of seeing that I actually loved the work, the intellectual challenge of it, the immense satisfaction of building something real and tangible that employed thousands of people. When Dad got sick, the decline was brutally fast. I spent every day at the hospital holding his hand, the skin thin and cool, talking about the future of the company, about new shipping routes, about our employees. Eliza's visits were brief, performative, and strained. They were like cameos in a film she didn't want to be in, and they always, without fail, ended with a pointed, impatient question about his affairs and their arrangements. The day the will was read was colder than I could have imagined, a bitter chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The lawyer, Mr. Davison, a man who had known me since I was in diapers, read the words that lit the fuse on our family. On the surface, the document seemed deceptively fair. The entire estate, valued at just over $1 billion, would be placed into a trust. My sister and I were to be equal beneficiaries and co-chairs of the company. Eliza's smile was predatory. She had come dressed for battle, but this was an easy, bloodless victory. Too easy. I knew my father. He was the most meticulous, strategic man I'd ever met. He played chess while everyone else played checkers. This simple 50-50 split just wasn't his style. It felt wrong, like a missing piece in a puzzle I couldn't yet see. But before I could even begin to process the discrepancy, the betrayal I never saw coming began. Eliza stood up, her movements rehearsed. She presented a leather-bound folder to the lawyers. Her voice, a carefully crafted instrument of deception, was dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm afraid I have some deeply disturbing news," she announced to the room. Inside that folder was a diary, supposedly written by her teenage son Leo. It was filled with page after page of fantastical, made-up entries detailing how I'd been systematically pressuring my dying father in his final days, how I'd been siphoning money into untraceable private accounts, and threatening to cut both Leo and Eliza out of the family entirely. She'd coached him perfectly. She even had Leo himself come in to sob to the lawyers, telling them between hiccuping breaths that he was scared of his Uncle Alex. It was a disgusting yet undeniably masterful performance. And just like that, I was formally accused of undue influence and felony fraud. Given the evidence, a tearful child and a diary full of damning lies, the estate lawyers had no choice. They awarded Eliza sole, provisional control of the trust while they launched a full investigation into me. In the space of an hour I was out. Cast out of my own life. The very first thing Eliza did with her newfound power was change the locks on the estate. I found out when I drove home that evening, exhausted and numb, and my key wouldn't turn. A new security guard, a man I didn't recognize, stepped out of the gatehouse and informed me I was no longer permitted on the property. The home I grew up in, every corner filled with a memory of my father, was now hers. I was unceremoniously shoved into a small city apartment my father had owned for years, a place she publicly called a charitable donation to the less fortunate, a line that made her new friends howl with laughter. The second thing she did was begin tearing down our father's legacy, piece by meticulous piece. She fired Dad's most loyal executives, men and women who had been with him for decades, people who had helped him build the empire from the ground up. She replaced them with her sycophantic friends, a collection of socialites and influencers who knew more about champagne brands and VIP guest lists than they did about shipping logistics. Then, in an act of pure spite, she sold off the original fleet of trucks our father had lovingly restored and kept in a small museum on the property. She held a press conference to announce it, calling them junkyard trash and a waste of valuable real estate. I watched it on the news, my blood running cold. Her gloating was a relentless, daily assault. She would post dozens of pictures of her extravagant parties on social media, always making sure to tag me in captions like, "Working hard or hardly working, brother? Some of us know how to enjoy the fruits of our labor." She bought a gaudy diamond-encrusted sports car in a hideous shade of pink and had it delivered not to the estate, but to my modest apartment building. She made sure it arrived on a Saturday morning, the engine roaring, creating a spectacle for all my neighbors to see as it was unloaded from a flatbed truck. One evening my phone rang. It was her. For a foolish, hopeful second, I thought she might be showing a flicker of remorse, a sliver of the sister I once knew. I was so wrong. "You should be grateful, you know," she said, her voice slick with condescension and the clinking of ice in a glass. "I'm letting you keep your little allowance from the family fund. It's a few thousand a month. It's more than you deserve, considering you tried to steal everything from me. From my son." Her words hit me like a physical blow. It was never about the money, and she knew it. It was about her using her own child as a pawn in her twisted game. It was about her twisting our entire family into something unrecognizable and ugly. It was about her dancing on the grave of everything our father had built and stood for. I felt utterly defeated, isolated, and profoundly stupid. She saw me as weak, as the quiet, responsible son who could be easily pushed aside and forgotten. And for a while I let her believe it. I needed her to believe it. Her arrogance was becoming my greatest asset. What Eliza, in all her glorious self-obsession, didn't know was that my father saw her for exactly who she was. He loved his daughter, of course, but he was never blind to her character. A few months before he passed, when the illness had taken his strength but not his mind, he called me into his study. He looked frail against the large leather chair, but his eyes were as sharp and clear as ever. "Alex," he said, his voice a low rasp. He pushed a thick, wax-sealed manila envelope across his expansive mahogany desk. "When I'm gone, Eliza is going to make a move. She'll be loud about it, she'll be ruthless, and she'll think she's incredibly clever. I need you to be smarter. I need you to be patient." He then explained everything. The will's simple 50-50 split was a deliberate facade, a trap. Buried deep within the labyrinthine legal jargon of the trust document was a provision he had wryly named the stewardship clause. It stated that the final distribution of the assets and the ultimate control of the company were provisional for a period of exactly 6 months following his death. The ultimate heir would be the one who, in those 6 months, proved they honored the company's 3 founding principles: integrity, innovation, and legacy. And here was the masterstroke, the final move in his long and brilliant career. The sealed envelope he had just given me contained a notarized letter of wishes. It was a separate, legally sound document that named me, and only me, as the sole, unimpeachable judge of who had successfully followed that clause. My father had given me all the power hidden in plain sight. "Let her have her moment," he had advised, his voice barely a whisper but filled with conviction. "Let her show the world exactly who she is. Give her the rope, son. Document everything. Her greed will be your weapon. Her ego will be her undoing." And just like that, I had a plan. A mission. While Eliza partied and gloated and tore down our father's work, I worked. I was no longer an apprentice. I was a silent guardian of his legacy. From my small apartment I began to build my case. I gathered sworn, notarized affidavits from the loyal employees she had so callously fired. I meticulously tracked her outrageous spending, creating spreadsheets that charted every dollar she wasted on vanity projects and personal luxuries. I documented her plans to sell off core, profitable divisions of the company simply to fund her lifestyle for the next few years. While she thought I was hiding in my apartment licking my wounds, I was building a fortress of evidence. A case so airtight that no team of high-priced lawyers could ever hope to tear it down. The 6-month clock was ticking, and with every arrogant social media post and every foolish, short-sighted business decision, Eliza was sealing her own fate. The 6-month anniversary of Dad's death arrived on a crisp autumn day. Eliza, feeling her power was now absolute and permanent, called a formal board meeting. The agenda she circulated was brutally simple: to officially remove me from my board seat and to formalize her permanent, sole control over the trust and the company. She walked into the boardroom like a queen taking her throne, dressed in a ridiculously expensive power suit, her unqualified, fawning executives trailing behind her like pilot fish. I was already there, sitting in my usual chair at the long table waiting. "Alex," she said, a sneer twisting her lips. She didn't even try to hide her disgust. "I'm surprised you showed up. Are you here for one last look at what you lost?" I just smiled calmly, a placid expression I had practiced for weeks. "I'm here to honor our father's wishes, Eliza. It seems to be something you've forgotten how to do." That was all it took. The switch was flipped. She launched into a blistering tirade. "Father's wishes?" she scoffed, her voice echoing in the silent room. He was an old man stuck in the past. His wishes were holding this company back. He never appreciated me, not like he appreciated you, his pathetic little shadow. This company needed a real leader with vision, not a boring accountant who's afraid of his own success. I deserve this. I took it. Her new board members nodded along in perfect, brainless synchrony. Mr. Davison and the other estate lawyers looked deeply uncomfortable. "Thank you, Eliza," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through her rant. "You've just made this much easier for everyone." I stood up and placed a thick folder identical to the one she had used 6 months prior, on the polished surface of the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, as per the terms of the trust established by my father, we are at the end of the 6-month evaluation period." I nodded to Mr. Davison, who looked stunned as I indicated a specific page in the trust document in front of him. His eyes scanned it, widened, and then he began to read the stewardship clause, aloud. A wave of confusion washed over the room. Eliza's face transitioned from smug satisfaction to baffled disbelief. "What is this?" she stammered, looking at her own lawyer, who simply shrugged. "That," I said, "is Dad's final test. A test of integrity, innovation, and legacy. A test I'm afraid you have failed in the most spectacular fashion." For the next 10 minutes I laid out my case with cold, dispassionate precision. I presented the financial reports detailing her grotesque wastefulness, the signed contracts for her plans to liquidate key assets, the sworn testimonies of the very people who had built the company alongside our father, whom she had cast aside like trash. Then I played my final card. "You based your entire takeover on a disgusting lie. A lie you forced your own son to tell." I slid another document across the table. "This is a sworn affidavit from your son Leo. He came to me a month ago, utterly consumed with guilt. It details exactly how you coached him, what you told him to write in that diary, and how you threatened him if he didn't comply." Eliza's face went bone white. She looked at the lawyers, her eyes wide with pure panic. "This is ridiculous. That boy is a child. This is inadmissible. That letter isn't legally binding." "The stewardship clause in the will most certainly is," Mr. Davison said, his voice grim and final. "And this letter of wishes, which we've authenticated, names Alex as the sole decider on this matter. It states that his judgment on the adherence to the principles is final and cannot be challenged." I turned to look my sister dead in the eye, letting the silence hang for a moment. "As the decider, according to our father's will, I find that you have violated every principle he held dear. You have acted without integrity, you have stifled innovation, and you have actively tried to destroy his legacy. Therefore, your position as co-chair is terminated, and your beneficiary status in the primary trust is revoked, effective immediately." You could have heard a pin drop. The silence was absolute. Eliza just stared, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound coming out. Her entire world, built on a foundation of lies and arrogance, had crumbled in less than 30 minutes. Her new board members were already avoiding her gaze, suddenly fascinated by their own shoes. Security was called. They escorted a screaming, protesting Eliza from the building she thought she owned, her threats and curses echoing down the hallway until they were finally silenced by the closing elevator doors. She was left with a small, separate trust our father had set up for her years ago. Enough to live a comfortable life, certainly, but a pittance compared to the billion-dollar empire she'd just lost. That afternoon I went to see my nephew Leo. He was terrified, convinced I would hate him. But I just pulled him into a hug, feeling the tension drain out of his small frame. I told him he wasn't to blame, that he was just another person his mother had tried to manipulate for her own selfish ends. I promised to teach him everything our father had taught me about business and about life, if he was willing to learn. For the first time in months, he looked at me and smiled a genuine smile. Today I run the company. The very first thing I did was rehire the entire old team. The day they walked back into the headquarters was one of the proudest of my life. We restored our father's truck museum, not as a monument to the past, but as a reminder of our foundations. And we're more profitable than ever. Why? Because we're investing in the future. In sustainable technology, in our employees, in legacy. My sister's greed was her downfall. She was so blinded by her own arrogance and entitlement that she never once considered that the quiet ones are often the most observant. She was so focused on the prize that she never bothered to read the rules of the game. She thought power was about being the loudest person in the room, about taking what you want through force and intimidation. But my father taught me that true power lies in integrity, patience, and knowing the details everyone else is too arrogant to overlook. She got her 6 months of triumph, but I got our father's legacy. And that is something that can't be bought. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have been as patient? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice being served, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more. Share and like, and remember to tell us where you are watching from and what time is it there.